A single mother and widow is thrown out of her home by her own family, but a stranger takes her in and changes everything. Can you imagine losing the love of your life at your lowest moment of pain and vulnerability, only to be cast out onto the street by the only family you have left? What would you do if the hand that was supposed to lift you up was the same one pushing you into the abyss, with your little child shivering from cold in your arms? This is the story of Eleanor, a woman who lost everything, but whose fate was about to take a turn that no one, least of all her, could have ever imagined. Subscribe to Historias para Vivir y Soñar so you don't miss uplifting stories that will touch your soul. And while you listen, tell us in the comments, have you ever felt like you hit rock bottom just before everything started turning around for the better? The air in the living room was thick, heavy with a silence sharper than any shouting. Elena could feel her sister-in-law Sylvia's eyes boring into the back of her neck, like daggers of ice. Her 5-year-old son, Matteo, oblivious to the storm brewing, was playing on the floor with a wooden toy car, the last gift from his father before a tragic accident took him forever. The soft sound of the wheels rolling across the floor was the only thing daring to break the tension. "We can't keep going like this, Javier. We just can't," said Sylvia, her voice laced with barely contained venom. She stood by the window, her back to Elena, but her reflection in the dark glass revealed a sneer of contempt. Javier, Elena's older brother, sat slumped in the main armchair, his head buried in his hands. He looked smaller, diminished by the pressure. "Sylvia, please, she's my sister. She just became a widow 6 months ago," he pleaded in a whisper. "And does that pay our bills?" Sylvia snapped, spinning around abruptly. Her gaze swept over Eleanor from head to toe, lingering on her modest clothes and pale, exhausted face. "She takes up a room, eats our food, uses our electricity. And what does she contribute? Nothing. Just tears and complaints. This house isn't a charity shelter. Javier, it's her or us." A burning knot rose in Elena's throat. Every word was a blow. She helped however she could. She cleaned the house until it sparkled, cooked for everyone, washed clothes, and kept Matteo quiet so he wouldn't disturb anyone. But to Sylvia, her presence was a stain, a constant reminder that she wasn't the absolute mistress of her home. "Sylvia, I'm looking for work," Elena said, her voice trembling, barely above a whisper. "I've put in applications everywhere. As soon as I get something, I swear." "Enough with the promises," Sylvia shouted, making Matteo jump and run to hide behind his mother's legs. The wooden car clattered to the floor. "You've been saying the same thing for 2 months. Who's going to hire a sad widow with no experience? You're dead weight, Eleanor, a burden on this family." Matteo began to cry quietly, clinging to his mother's skirt. Elena hugged him tightly, feeling his small body shake against hers. The humiliation tasted bitter in her mouth, a cold that froze her veins. She looked to her brother for a glimmer of support, of loyalty, the boy she'd grown up with and shared secrets with. But Javier wouldn't meet her eyes. They were fixed on the floor, defeated. "I'm sorry, Eleanor," he finally said, his voice broken by cowardice. "Sylvia's right. We have our own expenses, our own plans. We can't keep carrying you." Eleanor's world collapsed. The floor seemed to vanish beneath her feet. It wasn't Sylvia's cruelty that broke her. It was her own brother's betrayal, her own flesh and blood, the last pillar she thought she had. "What are you saying, Javier?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Pure, icy fear began to wrap around her. You're kicking us out. Sylvia smiled, a twisted, triumphant smile. Don't see it that way. We're giving you a push to take responsibility for your own life, she said, with fake sweetness that turned Eleanor's stomach. Now pack your bags. We want the house to ourselves tonight. Disbelief battled panic in Eleanor's chest. Bags. Where was she supposed to go? She had no one else. No money. It was getting dark and cold outside. That's no longer our problem, Sylvia declared, crossing her arms. She stepped closer to Javier and placed a hand on his shoulder, like a trainer reasserting control over her beast. Go pack your things, and don't take too long. Paralyzed by shock, Eleanor could only watch as her brother stood and left the room without looking at her, his footsteps thumping up the stairs like hammer blows in her head. She felt detached from her own body, as if watching a terrible movie about someone else's life. Mateo tugged at her dress. "Mommy, are we going on a trip? Are we going to see Daddy in heaven?" he asked with the heartbreaking innocence of a child who doesn't understand the world's cruelty. The tears Eleanor had been holding back finally spilled over. She knelt, hugged her son desperately, and buried her face in his hair that still smelled of baby shampoo. "No, my love, we're not going to see Daddy. We're going for a walk. A very long walk." She climbed the stairs like a robot. The small, austere room she'd occupied held all their belongings in one old suitcase. She packed their few clothes, a couple of photos of her late husband Ricardo, and Mateo's only treasured toy, a worn teddy bear Ricardo had given him at birth. Every item felt heavy, soaked in the life slipping from her grasp. From the hallway, she could hear Sylvia on the phone with a friend, laughing as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just destroyed 2 lives. When she came downstairs holding Mateo's hand and dragging the suitcase, Javier stood by the door with his back to her. Sylvia waited impatiently. "Here," Sylvia said, holding out a couple of crumpled bills. 50 pesos, so you can't say we didn't help at all. It'll buy you a coffee and a roll. Now go." Eleanor looked at the money with nausea. It was the alms of humiliation, but her pride was already trampled to dust. The only thing that mattered now was Mateo. With a trembling hand, she took the bills and slipped them into the pocket of her worn coat. She paused for a second in front of her brother. "Javier, look at me," she pleaded in a thread of voice. He slowly shook his head without turning. "Just go, Elena, please." That was the final blow. The family bond snapped forever in that instant. Sylvia flung the door wide open, letting in a blast of icy night air that made Mateo shiver. "Out," she ordered. Elena said nothing more. With what little dignity she had left, she stepped into the freezing night, carrying her son and a suitcase containing the remnants of her life. The door slammed shut behind them with a dull, final thud, sealing her fate. They were on the street. The city lights seemed distant and hostile. Cars whizzed by, indifferent to her drama. The cold was biting, seeping through her thin clothes and prickling her skin. Brave Mateo didn't complain, but Elena could feel his small body trembling uncontrollably. "Mommy, I'm cold," the boy whispered, his breath forming a little white cloud. "I know, my love." "Stay close to me," Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady. She unwrapped her thin scarf and wound it several times around his neck. They had nowhere to go. They walked aimlessly, block after block, as the night grew darker and the cold more intense. Every passerby was a stranger, every closed door a rejection. Fear clawed at her insides like a living beast. What was she going to do? Where would they sleep? Panic threatened to consume her, but Matteo's frightened eyes, trusting her completely, were the only anchor keeping her afloat. They found temporary shelter under the awning of a closed shop. They sat on the icy concrete step. Elena hugged Matteo, trying to shield him with her own body, sharing what little warmth they had left. Exhausted by fear and cold, the boy curled against her chest and finally fell asleep. Alone in the silence of the night, with her sleeping son heavy in her arms, Eleanor let herself cry. Silent, bitter tears. For her husband, for the life they had dreamed of together, for her family's cruelty, and above all, for her inability to protect her child. She felt utterly alone, invisible, a ghost in a city that didn't care. She looked up at the dark sky for a star, a sign, anything to give her a spark of hope. But the sky was covered in clouds. It was then, at her absolute lowest, with a broken heart and frozen body, convinced this was the end, that the night would swallow them and no one would notice, that she clung to Matteo like her only raft in an icy ocean and whispered a prayer into the wind, unsure if anyone would hear it. It wasn't for herself, but for him, for the little being asleep in her arms, whose only sin was being born into a world that could sometimes be so cruel. The night was long, and dawn seemed an impossible promise. The night didn't surrender easily. It clung to the streets with damp, biting cold that felt like teeth sinking into Elena's exposed skin and slipping through the thin seams of her coat. Matteo, in her arms, no longer shivered. He now let out small whimpers in his sleep, a pitiful sound that tore at his mother's soul. Elena tried to adjust him, cover him better, but her own body no longer produced warmth. She was numb. Her limbs felt like chunks of ice she could barely feel. Despair had shifted from a roaring monster to a cold, resigned calm. She thought about the 50 pesos in her pocket. What could they buy? An hour of warmth in an all-night cafe. And then what? Back into the darkness. The first grey light of dawn began to tint the sky, but it brought no promise of warmth. If anything, it made the air feel raw, more desolate. Streetlights flickered off, revealing a world of shadows and concrete. The city slowly woke, the distant rumble of a garbage truck, the protesting screech of a metal shutter opening. Soon, people would flood the streets, bundled up, hurried, heading to their warm lives, jobs, families. Eleanor and Matteo would be invisible to them, smudges on the urban landscape they'd prefer to ignore. "Mommy!" Matteo's little voice pulled her from her trance. He had woken and was looking at her with big brown eyes full of confusion and fear. "Why are we sleeping here? This bed is really hard." A sob caught in Eleanor's throat. She stroked his frozen cheek with stiff, clumsy fingers. "I know, my love. We were waiting for the sun to come up, so we can start a new game," she lied, her voice hoarse from unshed tears. "I'm hungry," he whispered. Those two words were like a knife. Her son's hunger, the ultimate proof of her failure as a mother. Pride, shame. Everything vanished. Only the primal instinct to protect her child remained. "Come on, sweetheart, let's find something warm," she said, standing with monumental effort. Her knees cracked, her muscles screamed, every movement sharp pain. She picked up the suitcase, took Matteo's little hand, and started walking again, with no direction. Her steps were slow, dragging. Every time someone passed, Elena lowered her gaze, feeling the weight of their imagined judgment. They would see a failed mother, a homeless woman. Humiliation burned beneath her frozen skin. Then a scent stopped her dead, an heavenly, warm, comforting aroma cutting through the stale morning air. Freshly baked bread, freshly brewed coffee, sugar, and home. It came from a small corner shop with an old brick facade and a wooden sign that read Panaderia El Amanecer. The golden light spilling from inside was a beacon in her ocean of despair. She approached, drawn like a moth to flame. Through the window she could see rows of sweet breads, conchas, cuernos, all golden and perfect. Steam fogged part of the glass. It was a world of warmth and abundance that felt a million miles from hers. "Mommy, it smells good," Mateo said, pressing his little nose to the glass. Just then, the door opened, and an older man stepped out to sweep the entrance. He was average height, with completely white hair, a slightly stooped back from years of work, and a flour-stained white apron. His pale blue eyes, surrounded by deep wrinkles, looked tired but kind. Seeing them standing there like statues of ice, his brow furrowed slightly. Elena felt a wave of panic. She expected shouting, an order to leave, to not scare away customers. She gently tugged Mateo's hand to start walking away, murmuring an apology. "I'm sorry, sir. We're leaving." "Wait," the man said. His voice wasn't harsh, it was deep and calm. "You've been out here all night, haven't you? I saw you when I arrived, before sunrise." Elena froze. He had been watching them. Shame burned inside her. "We were just resting," she stammered, unable to meet his eyes. The man was silent for a moment. His gaze settled on Mateo, his pale face, the oversized scarf, his little lips purple from cold. The old man's expression softened. The early morning hardness vanished, replaced by deep compassion. "The boy will get sick. And you too," he said with quiet certainty. He leaned the broom against the wall and held the door open. "Come in, please. It's warm inside." Eleanor stared in disbelief. It had to be a trap, a cruel joke. Life had taught her that lesson harshly just hours earlier. "We don't have money to buy anything, sir," she confessed, feeling her last defenses crumble. The man sighed wearily. "I didn't offer to sell you anything. I offered shelter from the cold. The bread is baking and the coffee is ready. Come in before I change my mind and turn into a grumpy old man," he said. And for the first time, a small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Hesitating, but driven by a need greater than her distrust, her son's need, Eleanor took a step, then another, and crossed the threshold. The warmth hit her like a wave, thick, fragrant warmth that seemed to melt the ice in her bones. The air smelled of yeast, butter, life. The shop was small and cozy, a few wooden tables, a glass counter, and at the back, an open kitchen door from which all that heat and light poured. "Sit there," the man said, pointing to a table in the corner. They obeyed in silence. Mateo looked around wide-eyed, as if he had entered a magical land. The old man disappeared into the kitchen and returned moments later with 2 steaming mugs and a plate bearing 2 large, fresh vanilla conchas straight from the oven. He placed thick, hot chocolate in front of Mateo and black coffee in front of Eleanor. "Drink. It'll bring life back to your bodies," he ordered gently. Mateo didn't need telling twice. He grabbed the mug with both hands and took a sip. His eyes closed in pure bliss. Elena watched the scene with a lump in her throat. The gratitude was so overwhelming it hurt. She lifted her own mug with trembling hands. The heat of the coffee seeped into her fingers, sending sparks of life up her arms. The first sip was bitter, strong, wonderfully hot. She felt it travel down her throat, dissolving the knot of anguish lodged there. They ate the bread in silence. For Eleanor, That sweet roll was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. It wasn't just food. It was kindness, compassion, a respite from suffocation. When they finished, the old man, who had been busy cleaning the counter, approached again. "My name is Arturo," he said, wiping his hands on his apron. "I'm Elena, and this is Matteo," she replied, her voice still fragile. "Why? Why are you doing this for us, Mr. Arturo?" Arturo sat across from her. His face grew melancholic. "Many years ago," he began, eyes lost in the past, "my wife, Rosa, and I lost our only son. A fever took him. After that, Rosa faded little by little. She died a couple of years later. She said she was going to take care of our boy on the other side." He paused, swallowing hard. "I've been alone ever since. This bakery is all I have left. And when I saw you out there, a child freezing and a mother with the look of someone who has lost the whole world, it's a look I know very well. I saw my Rosa in your eyes." Tears welled up in Eleanor's eyes again, but this time they weren't from despair. They were a strange mix of sadness and relief. For the first time, someone had not only seen her, but understood her without a word. My husband died 6 months ago," she confessed, "and my family, my brother, threw us out last night." The story poured out, clumsy and painful. Arturo listened patiently, nodding occasionally. His face was a map of empathy. When she finished, a heavy silence settled between them. "The world can be cruel when you're grieving," Arturo said at last, "and people sometimes fear others' pain. It makes them selfish." He leaned forward, his flour-covered, wrinkled hands resting on the table. "I have a small storage room in the back. It's nothing fancy. I use it for old flour sacks and junk. But it's dry and can be heated with a stove. There's an old but decent bed." Elena looked at him, not understanding where he was going. "You can stay there for a while," Arturo continued. "I'm not asking for rent, but my bones aren't what they used to be. I need someone to help clean the shop in the mornings and work the counter when it gets busy in the afternoons. In exchange, you get the room and food. It's all I can offer." The offer was so incredible, so unexpected, that Eleanor was speechless. A roof, food, work. It was more than she had dared dream in the last 12 hours. It was a miracle from nowhere, offered by a stranger with sad eyes. "I don't know what to say," she stammered. "You don't know us. We could be 2 souls who need help," he interrupted firmly. "And I'm an old man with an empty room and extra hands needed in the mornings. Sometimes solutions are that simple. Do you accept?" She looked at Matteo, almost asleep again, his face smeared with chocolate and wearing a peaceful expression she hadn't seen in months. Then she looked at Arturo, this angel in a baker's apron, and saw no pity in his eyes, only connection, a silent understanding of pain. "Yes," she whispered, the word feeling like the first stone of a new life. "Yes, I accept. Thank you. God bless you, Mr. Arturo. Thank you." Later, Arturo showed them the room. It was small, as he'd said, and smelled of dust and flour, but it had 4 walls, a door that closed, and a high window letting in timid light. It had a sagging mattress bed and a small wardrobe. To Eleanor, it was a palace, security, a sanctuary. That afternoon, while Arturo worked downstairs, Elena cleaned the room with energy she didn't know she had. She swept the dust, shook out the mattress, cleaned the little window, turning the forgotten storage space into a refuge, a nest. Arturo brought up thick blankets and a small electric heater that soon filled the space with comforting warmth. That night, for the first time in months, Elena tucked her son into a warm bed. Matteo fell asleep instantly with a smile on his lips. She sat on the edge of the bed, listening to his steady breathing and the soft hum of the bakery below. She wasn't alone, wasn't on the street. She had a roof and a job promise for tomorrow. She looked out the small window at the night sky, now clear and full of stars. The clouds were gone. It wasn't the end. Maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something new. A small, fragile flame of hope began to flicker in the darkness of her heart, fed by the unexpected kindness of a stranger. And for the first time in 6 months, Eleanor felt she could breathe again. The first days at the bakery were a balm for Eleanor's wounded soul. Routine became her salvation. She rose before dawn, when the air still held the quiet serenity of night, and the scent of Arturo's first batch of bread already wafted under her door. While Matteo slept peacefully, she went downstairs and worked with silent fervor. It wasn't just labor, it was gratitude in motion. She cleaned every corner not as duty, but as a sacred ritual, scrubbing the tiled floors until they gleamed, polishing the glass counter until spotless, arranging paper bags and napkins meticulously. She wanted Arturo to see, to feel, that his kindness hadn't been wasted. Arturo, a man of few words, simply watched with quiet approval, nodding now and then. That small sign was enough for Eleanor. It was worlds away from her sister-in-law's contemptuous stares. Mid-morning, she went up to wake Matteo. The boy had adapted to their new home with the incredible resilience of childhood. To him, living above a bakery was the greatest adventure. He woke to the smell of sweet bread, and Arturo always saved him a warm biscuit. The baker's tax, he called it with a wink. He spent mornings at a little table in the corner, drawing on paper Arturo gave him. A happy, secure child, protected from the cruel world they'd left behind. Seeing him with rosy cheeks and a sugar smudge at the corner of his mouth fueled Eleanor's heart every day. Soon, Eleanor learned the bakery's rhythm. She knew the regulars: Mrs. Perez, who always bought 2 bolillos for breakfast, the young student who got a coffee to go and a chocolate donut, the group of workers who came at noon for something sweet with lunch. She served them all with a warm, genuine smile, one she thought she'd lost forever. It was during those lunch hours that she noticed something. Despite being surrounded by the most delicious creations, Arturo ate very little. His lunch was usually just black coffee and a piece of stale bread. To keep the habit of hunger, he joked. But Eleanor could see the deep loneliness behind his words. She imagined him returning each night to an empty house with no one to cook a hot meal. The thought squeezed her heart. One day, while Matteo napped, Elena made a decision. With the small advance Arturo had given her that week, she bought basic ingredients: tomatoes, onion, ground meat, rice, for a simple stew, a recipe her grandmother had taught her. The kind of food that tastes like home, childhood, love. She moved through her little room's kitchen with grace and confidence she felt nowhere else. The knife chopping onion, the sizzle of garlic hitting hot oil, the scent of spices filling the air. Cooking was her secret language, the only way she knew to say, "Thank you, I care, you're not alone." When the stew was ready, she filled a deep plate and took it to Arturo, who sat at a table staring melancholically at the street. "Mr. Arturo," she said shyly, "I made a bit extra. It's not much, but I thought you might like to try it." Arturo looked surprised, then down at the steaming plate. The aroma of home-cooked food seemed to wake him from his daze. "You didn't have to go to the trouble, girl," he said, though his eyes said otherwise. "It's no trouble. Please eat before it gets cold," Elena insisted. Hesitantly, Arturo took a spoonful, brought it to his mouth, chewed slowly. His eyes closed. A long silence fell. Elena held her breath, afraid he wouldn't like it, that she'd been too bold. Finally, Arturo opened his eyes, and Elena saw something that took her breath away. They were moist, shining with unshed tears. "This taste," he said, voice thick with emotion. "My Rosa. She cooked just like this, with this same touch, as if she put her heart into the pot." He took another spoonful, then another, eating with an appetite Elena had never seen in him. He said nothing more until the plate was clean. Then he looked up at her in a new way. He no longer saw just the helpless woman he'd rescued from the cold. He saw something more. He saw talent. "Elena," he said seriously, "where did you learn to cook like this?" "My grandmother taught me," she replied. "She always said, food doesn't just fill the stomach, it heals the soul." Arturo nodded slowly, lost in thought. Over the following days, Elena kept cooking for him, for herself, and for Mateo. Juicy empanadas, thick lentil soup, chicken in tomato sauce. Each dish was a poem of home flavors, a reminder of love that transcends time. And each day, Arturo grew more convinced of the idea forming in his mind. One afternoon after closing, he called her over. "Sit down, Elena. We need to talk." Elena felt a chill of fear. Had she done something wrong? Overstayed his hospitality? "I've been thinking," Arturo began, steepling his fingers on the table. "This bakery has kept me fed for 40 years. I sell the best bread in the neighborhood, but only bread and coffee. At noon, people buy a sweet and go elsewhere for real food." He paused, looking at her intently. "Your food, Eleanor, is real food. Food with soul. And I think it's a sin that only you and I are eating it." "I don't understand, Mr. Arturo," Elena said. "It's simple. I want you to cook for sale here in the bakery," he announced. "We'll start small. 2 daily stews to go. We'll set up a hot corner at the counter. We'll use my pots, my kitchen if yours is too small. We'll put a sign on the door. Now serving home-cooked takeout. I'll cover ingredients at first. We'll split profits 50-50 after costs. It'll be your business, your chance to stand on your own." The proposal was so bold, so full of faith in her, that Elena felt overwhelmed. Fear and insecurity, her old companions, reared up. "But Mr. Arturo, who would want to buy my food? It's just simple cooking. I'm not a chef. I have no training." "Nonsense," Arturo cut in with unshakable conviction. "You don't need training to cook with heart. And that's what people crave, Elena. A taste that reminds them of home. A plate made with love. Believe me, I know bread, and I'm telling you, you know food." Arturo's belief in her was the final push she needed. With her heart pounding, she accepted. The first week was a whirlwind of activity and nerves. They designed a small menu, bought ingredients, and one morning a handwritten sign appeared on the door. Elena cooked with her soul in her fists. That day, they sold only 5 portions. Elena felt discouraged, but Arturo smiled. "Patience," he said. "Good things take time to be discovered." He was right. The next day, one of those first customers returned with a co-worker. The third day, a woman who had bought stew the day before came back for 3 portions for her family. Word began to spread through the neighborhood. Don Arturo's lifelong bakery now smelled different at noon. It smelled like home. Soon, a small line formed at lunchtime. Office workers, laborers, mothers short on time, all seeking Elena's authentic flavors. They told her things that made her blush. "Mom, these lentils are just like my mom used to make. What delicious empanadas. They remind me of my hometown." Each compliment was another brick rebuilding her self-esteem. At the end of the first month, she counted her share of the money, an amount she had never earned on her own. Holding the bills, feeling their weight and texture, it wasn't humiliating charity from her sister-in-law. It was money earned through her effort, her talent, the fruit of her resilience. The warmth of pride she felt then didn't come from the stove. It came from deep within. The first thing she did was buy Matteo a new pair of shoes without worn soles. Seeing the joy on his face when he tried them on was her true reward. Eleanor was no longer the frightened shadow serving coffee. Now she was Doña Elena, the one with the stews. People greeted her on the street. She had found not just income, but identity. She was respected, independent, becoming the master of her own destiny. If you're getting emotional about Elena's rebirth and believe in second chances, hit like right now to support her journey. And don't leave yet, because just when she starts believing life has finally settled, fate has a surprise in store that will test her heart in ways she never imagined. As days passed, the little business grew. Arturo, happier than he'd been in years, helped, gave advice, and together they formed an unlikely but unbeatable team. He was the wise master of bread, she the queen of home-cooked meals. Panaderia El Amanecer was no longer just the neighborhood's best bread spot. It was also home to the best lunch. And Eleanor, standing before her steaming pots, face glowing from steam and pride, finally felt she had found her place in the world. The cold of that night on the street now felt like a memory from another life, a distant nightmare she had finally woken from. Life for Eleanor had taken on a rhythm as sweet as the scent of fresh bread and as comforting as the steam of her midday stews. Months turned the fragile seed of hope into a sturdy, leafy tree. She no longer startled at every night noise, no longer woke with that icy oppression in her chest. The little upstairs room had become a true home, walls covered in Matteo's drawings, filled with security and affection. Her food business wasn't just stable, it thrived. With earnings, she bought Matteo a new bed and decent winter clothes, luxuries that had seemed unreachable months ago. She and Arturo had become family, not of blood, but of something far stronger, rescued souls. They shared work mornings, quiet but understanding lunches, and knowing smiles. When a customer praised Elena's cooking, Arturo beamed. Arturo had been rejuvenated. The deep melancholy in his eyes had been replaced by a spark of purpose. Eleanor and Matteo had brought life back to his bakery and to his heart. It was in this newfound peace that a new face became part of the daily landscape. His name was Marcos, a man in his late 30s, strong build forged by labor, calloused hands that moved with surprising gentleness. He worked at a nearby materials warehouse and appeared every midday without fail in his dusty uniform, dark hair slightly tousled, and a shy smile seemingly reserved just for her. The first time he saw her, Eleanor simply served his stew like any customer. But he didn't leave right away. He ate quietly at a table, and before going, approached the counter. "Ma'am," he said, voice deep and calm, "I have to tell you, I've been eating on the street for years, and I've never tasted anything that feels so much like home." "Thank you, Elena." Unaccustomed to direct compliments, she felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you for buying," she replied with a nervous smile. But Marcos returned the next day, and the next, and the next. Soon his arrival became a small, bright spot in Elena's day. He wasn't like other customers. He noticed details. When she looked tired, praised the kitchen aromas, and most importantly, treated Matteo with a tenderness that melted her heart. "Hello, champ. What masterpiece are you painting today?" he'd ask, crouching to see the boy's drawings. And Matteo, usually shy with strangers, proudly showed his work, telling stories of superheroes and monsters. Marcos listened with genuine attention, asking serious questions as if speaking to a fellow artist. For Elena, watching that interaction was like seeing a plant bloom in a garden she thought barren. After Ricardo's unconditional love and her brother's subsequent betrayal, she had locked her heart with 7 padlocks, convinced her only mission was caring for Matteo. There was no room for anyone else. But Marcos, with his patience, respect, and unpretentious kindness, was finding the key to each lock without even looking for it. One Saturday afternoon, after a busy day, Marcos offered to help carry heavy boxes to storage. When finished, they lingered in the hallway in comfortable silence. "You're an incredibly strong woman, Elena," he said suddenly, meeting her eyes. There was no pity, only deep, sincere admiration. "What you've built here from nothing is remarkable." "Arturo helped me," she replied, looking down, feeling vulnerable under his gaze. "I know. Don Arturo told me a bit," Marcos admitted. "I also know what it's like to lose someone. I lost my wife 3 years ago to illness. I know what it feels like when the world ends and you still have to get up the next day because there's no choice." That confession built a bridge between them. Suddenly, he wasn't just the kind customer. He was a fellow member of the silent club of broken hearts fighting to keep beating. Eleanor felt the urge to tell her own story, but held back. It was still too soon. Their relationship blossomed slowly, like one of her stews. Counter chats turned into longer conversations after closing. They took walks in the nearby park, with Matteo running ahead, looking for the first time like a normal family. Eleanor found herself laughing again, deep, soul-filling laughs. She felt a lightness she hadn't known in years, and realized, with a mix of fear and joy, that she was falling in love. Just when Eleanor began to believe life was finally smiling on her without reservation, disaster struck. It was a Tuesday morning. Arturo had put the first batch of bread into the big brick oven, the heart of the bakery, a steel beast that had worked flawlessly for over 30 years. Suddenly there was a loud metallic bang, followed by a sharp hiss, and then dead silence. The smell of burnt wiring filled the air. Arturo rushed to the oven. His usually calm face was ashen. "It can't be," he muttered, trying to restart it. But the oven was dead, completely dead. They called a technician, a gruff man, who after an hour inspecting the machine delivered the verdict bluntly. The main motor and entire electrical system are fried. "Look, this thing is an antique. Fixing it would cost almost as much as a new one. And I don't even have the parts. They're discontinued. Sorry, this oven is history." Eleanor's world stopped. She looked at Arturo, who seemed to age 10 years in an hour. He sank heavily onto a flour sack, head in hands. "It's over," he whispered. "Without the oven, there's no bakery." Panic, the familiar icy beast, gripped Elena. No bakery meant no food business. No business meant no money. No money meant the image of her and Matteo shivering on a shop doorstep returned with terrifying clarity. No, not again. She couldn't go back there. For the next 2 days, the bakery stayed closed. The silence was unnatural, oppressive. Elena tried cooking on her small electric stove, but could only make a few portions, nowhere near enough to sustain the business. They asked about a new oven. The price was astronomical, far beyond their modest savings. Despair began to eat away at the hope they had worked so hard to build. Marcos arrived at noon as usual and found the shop dark, closed sign on the door. Worried, he knocked until Elena let him in. She told him what happened, voice breaking, fighting tears. He listened, his face hardening with every word. That afternoon, Marcos didn't return to work. He spent hours on the phone calling suppliers, second-hand equipment shops, searching for a solution. But everything was too expensive, too far, too complicated. Night fell like a blanket of defeat. The next morning, Marcos appeared at the bakery door, just as Elena opened. He wasn't in work clothes. He wore his best outfit. He had dark circles as if he hadn't slept, but his eyes burned with unshakable determination. In his hand, he held a thick envelope. "Elena," he said seriously, "I found the solution." "Did you find a cheaper oven?" she asked, a thread of hope rising. "No, something better." He handed her the envelope. "Here, this is everything you need to buy the new one, the one from the catalogue." Eleanor looked confused. She opened the envelope. It was stuffed with bills, a huge sum. "Where? Marcos, I can't accept it. It's too much." "Listen to me," he said, gently taking her hands. His were warm and steady. "For the last 5 years, I've saved every peso I could. I had a dream, to buy my own delivery truck, start my own business, be my own boss." He paused, his gaze incredibly tender. "Last night I realized my dream had changed. My dream now is to see you smile again, like you did when talking about your stews. My dream is for Mateo to keep growing in a happy, safe home. A truck can wait, your happiness can't." Eleanor was breathless. The sacrifice was immense. He was handing her his own future, his dream, in an envelope. It wasn't a loan. It was a gift, a declaration, the greatest proof of love anyone had ever given her. Tears spilled hot down her cheeks, this time tears of gratitude, wonder, and a love so deep it hurt. "Marcos, I can't." "Yes, you can," he interrupted gently but firmly. "I'm not saving you, Elena. I'm investing in the bravest, hardest-working woman I've ever met. We're a team, remember? Teams help each other through tough times. Please let me do this. Let me be part of your life, for real." Overwhelmed by emotion, by the magnitude of his gesture, Eleanor could only nod, speechless. She hugged him, clinging as if he were her only anchor in a stormy sea, crying into his shoulder. He held her tightly, stroking her hair, whispering comfort. In that embrace, in the silence of the dead bakery, 2 broken hearts fused into one new, stronger, indestructible heart. The crisis had threatened to destroy everything, but instead it forged a bond of love, as strong as steel, and as warm as a new oven's fire. The arrival of the new oven marked a new era for Panaderia El Amanesa. It was a gleaming stainless steel machine with digital controls and efficiency that left the old brick oven in the Stone Age. Arturo regarded it with a mix of respect and nostalgia, but it was Elena who felt its true meaning. It wasn't just metal. It was the embodiment of Marcos's sacrifice, the foundation for their future. With a heart overflowing with gratitude words couldn't express, Elena worked harder than ever. The bakery didn't just reopen, it was reborn. Besides Arturo's traditional breads, the new oven let Elena expand her menu. Savory tarts, roasted chickens, homemade lasagnas. Success was immediate and overwhelming. People no longer just came for lunch, they ordered dinner for the whole family. They hired a young woman from the neighborhood to help at the counter during peak hours. Marcos was a constant presence. He finished his warehouse shift and came straight to the bakery to help, washing big pots, fixing a wobbly table, or simply playing with Matteo so Elena could focus. Their relationship solidified day by day, forged in shared work, laughter after exhausting days, and the quiet certainty they had found their life partner. They became an inseparable team. Arturo watched them with a benevolent patriarch's smile, happy to see life and love blooming in what had been his lonely refuge for so long. One day, Marcos took Elena and Matteo to see a small plot on the neighborhood outskirts. It had a big leafy tree in the center. "I've been looking into it," Marcos said, excitement contained in his voice. "With what the business is earning and what I can add, we could get a loan. We could build a house here, our house, with a garden for Matteo to play and a kitchen as big as you want." Elena looked at him, eyes full of tears. A house, their own house, the most basic dream, brutally torn away, now within reach. They would no longer be grateful tenants of a storage room. They would be architects of their own home. They hugged under that tree's shade, and in that embrace sealed the promise of a future that finally felt solid and bright. It was at the peak of this happiness, when the sun shone brightest in Elena's life, that dark clouds from her past returned. They arrived one Tuesday afternoon, when the shop was full, the air buzzing with customer chatter and clinking plates. Elena was in the kitchen, flushed from oven heat, supervising a tray of roast chicken. The young helper Laura peeked in, uncertain. "Doña Elena, there are 2 people outside asking for you. They say they're your family." An icy shiver ran down Elena's spine, instantly extinguishing the kitchen warmth. Family. For others, it meant refuge and love. For her, it meant betrayal and pain. She knew, with stomach-churning certainty, who they were. She took a deep breath, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked out. There they stood by the counter, utterly out of place in her world of warm aromas and friendly faces, like ghosts at a feast, her brother Javier and sister-in-law Sylvia. But they weren't the same people who had thrown her out. Time had not been kind. Sylvia's arrogance and contempt had been replaced by thinly veiled desperation. She wore clothes pretending elegance, but visibly worn, and makeup couldn't hide the dark circles and bitterness at her mouth's corners. Javier looked even more shrunken. His gaze evaded hers, shoulders slumped under invisible defeat. "Elena," Javier said, barely a whisper. You look well." Sylvia was more direct. Well, so this is where you ended up," she said, scanning the place with envy and disdain. "It took us a while to find you. You hid pretty well. Looks like you've got a thriving business." The old Eleanor, the broken, frightened woman, would have shrunk, apologized for existing. But that Elena was gone. She had been reforged in adversity and tempered by love and respect. This Elena straightened, lifted her chin, and met their eyes, clear and steady. "I didn't hide. I rebuilt my life," she replied, voice calm but sharp as glass. "What do you want?" Sylvia's audacity knew no bounds. "Well, you see, little sister-in-law," she began with false sweetness that nauseated Elena. "Things haven't gone well for us. Javier was laid off months ago. The business he tried failed. We're going through a tough time." She paused dramatically. "And since family helps family, we thought you could, lend us some money. To start over. We'd pay you back, of course." Eleanor felt a bitter, dry laugh rise in her throat. Family helping family. The irony was so thick she could almost touch it. She looked at her brother for a hint of shame, remorse. But Javier only stared at the floor, letting his wife fight, as always. "No," Elena said. The word was simple, final, a granite wall. Sylvia blinked, surprised by the resistance. "Excuse me, I don't think I heard right." "I said no," Eleanor repeated, louder, her voice ringing in the sudden hush that fell over the shop. Remaining customers pretended to study the breads, but listened intently. "The night you threw me and my 5-year-old son out into the cold, you told me my suffering was no longer your problem. Remember?" Her gaze locked on Sylvia's. "Well, your situation now is no longer mine." Sylvia's face twisted into a mask of rage. "Ungrateful wretch! This is how you repay all the years we gave you a roof after your husband got himself killed and left you ruined." Before Eleanor could reply, a firm hand rested on her shoulder. Marcos. He had arrived unnoticed and heard enough. He stood beside her, tall and imposing, a protective barrier. "I believe the lady has given her answer," Marcos said, voice deep and calm, but edged with steel. "And I'll ask you to leave. You're not welcome here." Javier finally looked up, startled by the stranger's intervention. "And who are you to butt in?" he muttered. "I'm the man who loves this woman," Marcos declared, hand gently squeezing Eleanor's shoulder. "The man who respects her. The man who watched her rise from the ashes you threw her into. I'm everything you, as her brother, should have been, and weren't." Marcos's words hit Javier like a punch. He stepped back, finally ashamed, defeated. Sylvia, however, wouldn't surrender easily. Desperate, she tried one last low blow. "You have no right. That boy is your nephew," she shouted at Javier, pointing toward the kitchen where Mateo now watched fearfully from the doorway. "Tell her something. Tell her she's denying us a plate of food." That was the final mistake, bringing Mateo into it. A volcanic force surged from Eleanor's depths. She stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice was no longer calm. It was a lioness's roar protecting her cub. "Both of you get out of my shop now," she ordered. Such power and conviction rang in her words that even Sylvia recoiled. "You are nothing to me. My family is here." Her gaze softened briefly as it took in Marcos Arturo, who had appeared beside her with a rolling pin, and Mateo at the door. "This is my family. You're just two strangers who made a terrible mistake and will have to live with it." She opened the shop door. Out. Defeated, humiliated, Javier and Sylvia turned and left. They crossed the threshold back into the same street from which Eleanor had emerged. She watched them shrink with every step until they vanished into the crowd. Only then did she exhale. She didn't feel triumphant or vengeful. She felt free. The last chains binding her to her painful past had snapped. Marcos enveloped her in his arms. Mateo ran to her and hugged her legs. Arturo placed a hand on her arm, pride shining on his face. Looking at the faces of her true family, Eleanor knew the cycle was complete. She was no longer the victim. She was the survivor, the builder of her own destiny. And her future, filled with the aroma of warm bread and true love, had just begun. Javier and Sylvia's exit from the bakery wasn't an explosion, but the quiet deflation of a balloon. It left no crater of anger, just empty space, quickly filled by the warmth and love of Eleanor's real family. That night, for the first time in ages, Eleanor spoke of her brother, not with bitterness, but with distant sadness, as if talking about an acquaintance who took a wrong path. Seated at the kitchen table with Marcos and Arturo while Mateo slept upstairs, she finally put words to the epitaph of that broken relationship. "Today I realized I don't hate them," she said softly, staring at her tea. "I just feel nothing. They're ghosts, echoes of a life that's no longer mine." Marcos took her hand across the table, thumb stroking her knuckles. Because your life is here, Elena, with us. The past has no power over you anymore." Arturo nodded from his chair with serene wisdom. You close the door, and sometimes closing a door is the bravest act of all. That was indeed the final chapter of her past. The years that followed were not dramatic upheavals, but the quiet, steady building of happiness, brick by brick, day by day. A year and a half after the confrontation, the dream Marcos had whispered under the tree became reality. On the small plot now stood a house, not a mansion, but a solid, beautiful home with big windows letting in floods of sunlight and a cheerful blue front door. It had a little garden where Matteo, now a lively, chatty, almost 8-year-old, chased butterflies and helped Marcos plant flowers. And at the house's heart was Elena's kitchen, spacious, bright, with a big central island and an oven she cherished. From it, she could see the whole garden. Marcos had also fulfilled his dream. With his share of profits and a small loan, he bought his own delivery truck and founded a little logistics company, Transportes M, for Marcos and Elena. His business thrived on his honesty and work ethic. Every afternoon, the familiar sound of his truck parking outside announced the family was complete. The bakery, too, had transformed. No longer just Don Arturo's place, it was now El Amanecer de Elena. Though Arturo remained its soul, baking artisan bread every dawn, it had become a beloved neighborhood restaurant. Elena hired 2 more cooks, taught them her recipes, and now oversaw the business, creating new dishes and ensuring the taste of home never faded. The happiest day came on a sunny spring afternoon in their new house's garden, under the same leafy tree where they had dreamed it all. Elena and Marcos were married. It was an intimate, simple, overwhelmingly emotional ceremony. Matteo, in a little suit, solemnly carried the rings on a cushion. The only guests were bakery employees, close neighbors, and regular customers turned friends. Elena, in a simple white dress radiating the happiness on her face, walked the grass aisle on Arturo's arm. The old baker, who had become the grandfather Matteo never had, and the father Elena had found again, trembled with emotion. When he gave her away, he whispered to Marcos, "Take care of my girls, son. They're my greatest treasure." Before a justice of the peace, with sunlight filtering through the leaves, Elena and Marcos exchanged vows. Not fancy words, but straight from the heart promises. He vowed to always be her refuge and partner, to remind her daily of her strength and fill her life with laughter. She vowed to be his home, his partner, to honor his kindness and love him with all the intensity of a heart he had helped heal. When they kissed, warm applause erupted. It celebrated not just a marriage, but the triumph of love and resilience over cruelty and despair. Life settled into a peaceful, happy rhythm. Mornings of coffee and toast in their sunny kitchen. Afternoons filled with Matteo's school stories. Evenings, after tucking in their son, Elena and Marcos sat on the porch stargazing, often in comfortable silence, simply enjoying the peace they had earned. Sometimes Arturo stayed for dinner and told old neighborhood tales, his deep voice the soundtrack of their home. One such night, Elena was in her kitchen preparing dessert. She looked out the window into the garden. Under the porch light, Marcos tossed a ball to Matteo. Arturo sat in a rocker, eyes closed, a peaceful smile on his face. The air smelled of damp earth and jasmine. In that perfect moment, Elena felt a wave of gratitude so deep it stopped her in her tracks. She remembered with clarity that no longer hurt the woman she had been. The frightened widow, homeless mother, shivering on a closed shop's doorstep, feeling the world had forgotten her. She looked at that former self not with pity, but with immense respect and tenderness. That woman had walked through the darkest valley, so this one, living in light, could exist. That woman had found the strength to take one more step, then another, until an outstretched hand appeared in the darkness. And now she had her house, her family, her permanent dawn. Elena's story, the single mother and widow, teaches us a profound, powerful lesson. It shows that sometimes life forces us to the coldest, darkest bottom, not to destroy us, but to give us the chance to rebuild on much stronger foundations. It proves that true family isn't always the one sharing our blood, but the one that appears in our harshest winters to offer shelter, the one that believes in our talents when we don't and celebrates our victories as their own. Elena's life is a testament to the incredible strength of the human spirit. It reminds us that even after the longest night, the sun always rises again, that one stranger's kindness can be the beacon guiding us back to shore. It teaches that talent, love, and hard work are the tools to forge a far brighter destiny than the one forced upon us. Eleanor's story has reached its end, but her legacy of strength and hope is only beginning. Comment the word victory if you believe that no matter the difficulties, love and kindness can always triumph in the end. Let's fill the comments with the power of that word to inspire everyone going through a tough time. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Hidden Tears Tales and turn on notifications so you never miss a story reminding you of the power of overcoming and second chances.